Hi, my name is Mike Fell. I'm a researcher at UCL Energy Institute. I'm a social researcher, and I focus on demand flexibility. So I'm interested in when people use electricity and how and why and whether we can change that to sort of support operation of the system. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the role there could be for AI-enabled sort of preference agents in helping us manage our energy use. But before that, a pause for poetry. So I'm going to inflict some poetry on you. I apologize in advance. When fickle winds do stir the turbine blades, and Sol's bright largesse floods the noonday wire, wise households shift their hour, their use delayed, to dance in measure with the grid's desire. I was thinking about putting a pause for applause slide. Thank you, come on, I say. Anyway, the point of that was one of the first things that a lot of people did or do when they discover ChatGPT is get it to write about their work in the style of Shakespeare. So naturally, that's what I did. That was one of the first things. One of the second things I did was ask it, well, I use Claude now, could you please think and act in the style of Michael Fell in the context of energy? What would happen then? So effectively, could I get an AI to behave like me and represent me in some way? So you might ask, why might this be of interest? Why would I be bothered about doing this? So this is me in my house, and if we imagine jumping forward a few years, we're expecting many more households to have things like this: electric vehicles, their on-site generation, electric heating. And those are all things that might need to be coordinated together to take advantage of lower electricity prices, for example. I mean, that's kind of straightforward to do already with existing automation and algorithmic approaches. But let's imagine we've got my energy supplier taking control of my heat pump and operating that on one tariff. We might have my EV manufacturer controlling when my EV is charging, and my other energy use charged by other actors. It starts to get a little bit complicated for me to keep track of, am I really on the best tariff that suits my needs? Then let's extend this out to other houses in my neighborhood. We're all sharing a constrained distribution network, and I might want to be able to negotiate with these other households to make use of the space available on the grid to use electricity in such a way that we can all get the heat and charge when we need to, but without stepping on my neighbor's toes and making it so that we all have to pay more, for example. So there might be some negotiation going on. And we might even be sharing assets like local generation or local storage. And I might want an agent, for example, that can take into account what the needs are of different households in my area. And following rules that we've all agreed together. Essentially, the point I'm making is that we're potentially looking at a much more complex system of managing electricity networks, and that systems that are aware of our preferences and how we want to act could be useful in those contexts. So, starting work in this area, you'll see that there's actually been a lot of research on how we might use large language models, especially to represent humans. So especially like samples of humans in replicating survey results, for example. So that might be generating characteristics of people based on random samples. Or the second paper listed there is one which has done long, 2-hour-long in-depth ethnographic interviews with participants to inform agents that can then represent them. And there are a whole bunch of companies that do this as well for user testing purposes. So if you're developing a service, instead of getting people to test it, you can get these kind of AI representations of people to test it. So that's got big cost savings, and it's quite interesting. There's also quite a few downsides. There are big concerns around AI misrepresenting and stereotyping people. It can be hard to validate what they come out with. It can be, are these preferences really the ones that would have been expressed? So that's the challenge that the work I'm going to say a little bit about now set out to get into. But the work I've been doing is with working with co-designing AI preference agents with research participants. So what I've been doing is collecting background data from my sample of participants to create an initial kind of agent description, and then sitting down in an interview with them where they get to refine and specify and test the ways in which they are represented by their agent. So the things that it captures about them, their values, their household characteristics, the things they really care about, the things they think are special to them, and then test like by saying how they might respond to a scenario and then looking at how that agent responds to the scenario and refining on that basis to see if it really is aligned with what they want to be done. And this work is still ongoing and the analysis is still ongoing, but it's been throwing up some interesting results, I would say. So it doesn't always work out well. One of the problems I found with the agent responses is that, sometimes they can be quite a lot more decisive and sort of declarative on one side or another of an issue than people might be. People might be giving a much more kind of nuanced or unsure response to questions. And it also tends to lack nuance sometimes in the way that it interprets people's values. So people who are stressing how much they value fairness and equality, it might support certain kinds of policies when asked about them, where in reality, people I've spoken to in the interviews might be saying, well, I don't really agree with that policy. I'd rather do it this other different way. So you don't see that sort of thing coming out. But what you do also often see is people being really impressed and almost sort of blown away sometimes by how close the agent's response comes to what their preference actually was. So, here this is a participant saying, the agent literally captured everything in a much more succinct way than I probably explained here. So they'd given their answer to the scenario I was describing, looked at the agent's response and thought, yeah, not only has it kind of captured what I thought, it's kind of done it better than I did myself. And I even had examples of people saying, I think it's represented my view on this better than I could have done myself. So emerging from this work, after doing these interviews, I did some kind of follow-up survey. And of my, albeit it's a small qualitative sample at the moment of 12 participants, the vast majority of them in that survey strongly agree that they feel that their agent at the end of that process did a good job of representing their preferences. So people, I think, had come to develop an initial sort of sense of trust in what their agent was kind of doing for them. So also as part of that validation work, that survey that people completed afterwards, I presented people with this further survey with a range of new scenarios which hadn't previously been tested with the agent, and then I separately got their agent to respond to those scenarios to see how well aligned they were. And actually it was quite a mixed picture. So if you look at this figure here, the horizontal rows are for each participant, and the green equals are kind of when it got it right, and the red crosses are for when it got it wrong. And for some participants, like participant 9 there, their agent almost had them nailed and reflected their response to almost all of the scenarios. Whereas for others, it was a much more mixed picture where sometimes they got them almost always all wrong. But you can see that there was this strong agreement initially that people thought that their agents were well representing their preferences. I mean, this is obviously a work in progress, and I think there's more that you could do to make agents better reflect what people's preferences are. But for me, the takeaway point from what I'm saying here is that in this area, the kinds of scenarios that I'm talking to people about relating to flexibility, they're quite unfamiliar to a lot of people. People don't have formed views, and I think they're potentially quite open to when they see a plausible view expressed by an agent that they've been involved in creating, that they could come to think, yeah, that's a reasonable view, a reasonable representation of my preferences, not necessarily recognizing how there might be other sort of structural factors related to the platform that the agent runs on, for example, shaping those preferences that they come to hold. My final thing I want to say really is that, so based on my work so far, I think that co-designing agents has definitely got promise, but in a sense its strength is its weakness. Because it kind of engenders trust in those agents representing our preferences, the more trusted we make our agents, the more likely that we are to have our thoughts and actions potentially come to be shaped by them. and ways in which, as individual users, it might be quite hard to recognize. It's only when you zoom out and look across at the structural effects of the role of agents in managing electricity use that we might start to get concerned. So my key point I wanted to learn is we are not necessarily the only ones doing the designing. We might also be the ones being designed by this kind of process. So yeah, pros and cons. Thank you.